So welcome everyone to our first virtual event of the year. We're here to talk about our Crested Cuties and the Tucson Audubon recipe card for how to attract more of these cuties to your yard. We're joined here by Jennie MacFarland, Kimberly Matsushino, and Olya Phillips, who all work in our science division here at Tucson Audubon. And they're going to be sharing today some tips on how to make your yard more bird friendly, particularly to cardinals, Pyrrhuloxias, and Phainopeplas. So before we begin, I'll just give a little intro. I'm sure everyone here has used Zoom before by now, but just in case, this is going to be recorded, so we'll have it up on our YouTube channel, hopefully sometime in the next couple of weeks. There is a chat button at the bottom of your screen or somewhere on your screen, depending on whether you're using a computer or a tablet. And you can put questions for our three speakers anytime in the chat. And we'll probably get to all of those at the end. We're going to ask you to keep yourselves muted during the talk. During the talk, we'll ask you to keep yourselves muted until there may be time for questions, and then you'll be able to unmute yourself, or like I mentioned, put your questions in the chat. Without further ado, I will go ahead and turn it over to our speakers for the day, and they'll have a presentation for us. So Kim, Olya, and Jennie, take it away.
All right, thank you. Thank you so much, Kirsten. Okay, so it's going to be definitely a group presentation. I'm going to do the first section, then Kim, and then guest starring Olya will give us some really good information. So I do want to just first say that this is a series of talks, and this one is called Crested Cuties. Oh, it's one with backgrounds. Someone called Crested Cuties, and this is the series based on our new recipe cards. And we'll talk about this at the end too, about the recipe cards themselves and how you can come pick up copies of these yourself, but they're a really cool outreach tool that we've developed to try to share information with people about how to make your yards better for birds and wildlife. So go ahead, Kim, go ahead and share that presentation. So this will be a series, and this is the first of the series.
Sorry. Yeah. I almost got the files all in, but we're good. Okay, 1 second. Sorry. Oh boy.
So we're doing some audio visual effects. We have both visual components and audio components, as that's so often how it goes with actual bird watching. And I mean, Crested Cuties was a name that came to me for this concept, like one of those in the middle of the night type things. And I really wanted to focus on birds and wildlife that people ask about a lot. And this is our second set of 5. So these new ones with the white backgrounds, these are our second set of 5. Our initial set of 5 bird sort of clades that we did for our recipe cards were sort of like the most wanted birds. So we did, like, of course, hummingbirds was our first one, and then Gambel's quail, and desert finches, which was lesser goldfinch and house finch, and what am I saying? Achoya dwellers, which was cactus wren and curved-bill thrasher. And then, of course, then our very last one was tiny raptors, because I really wanted birds and species that wouldn't intimidate people, since a really important thing to keep in mind, especially about those first 5 cards we did, was that we were really looking for a general audience, not just birders. I especially was trying to reach people who, you know, most people like birds, but didn't really think that much about trying to get birds in their yard. Those are who I really was trying to reach out to. And things like hummingbirds and Gambel's quail was perfect. But for this next set of 5 cards, 6 through 10, we really wanted to get a little more, well, keeping that in mind, that we wanted birds that people like, but also get more into the nitty gritty of a little more detailed information. Is the talk working, Kim?
Yeah.
Can you get let's share your screen then.
Am I not?
No. At least I'm not seeing it.
Okay, hold on.
Okay, now I see your desktop. There we go. Enter full screen. There we go. Okay. So Crested Cuties is our focus of this talk. So one of our recipe cards of our new set, our new series. And I really love this sort of recipe idea because all of our cards are organized in this sort of ingredients and directions idea. And I think it's a concept that a lot of people can wrap their heads around. And it really was. And then I see the first question. And yes, they are available at the shop. And we're going to talk about that at the end. You can come pick them up at our nature shop. They're available right now. This was a concept that was shared with me from the very beginning from the founder of the Tucson Bird Count, Mike Rosenzweig, was a professor at the University of Arizona, and he called it a recipe card. And I could never really shake that idea. So ever since, this is how I've always thought of these habitat enhancement cards, where we took information from the Tucson Bird Count, where the main concept of trying to make Tucson a better place for birds, or urban centers, with Tucson being our workspace, and then share that information with regular people so that we could then make Tucson better for birds. All right, go ahead, next slide, Kim. Okay, so meet the cuties with crests. So these birds, two of them are closely related and the third one not at all, but they all look quite similar in the sense that they all have the absolute best hairdos. They all have these little crests, all three of these birds. And all three of these birds are, I'd say, among the most asked about. So at Tucson Audubon, when we're at outreach events, or people who come into the nature shop, or people who come in walking down towards the 4th Avenue Street Fair, or whenever we're out interfacing with the public, these three species are some of the most mentioned by people, where people either want to know what they are, what they're called, or how to say their names. That's one we get quite a lot. How do you say the name of that bird? You know, what's that black cardinal called? I saw the name and I have no idea how to say it. So it's northern cardinal, Phainopepla, and Pyrrhuloxias. And Pyrrhuloxias is the one that really trips people up. It's a great Scrabble word. And we're going to talk about that, why it's called that, because it's quite an unusual name. Go ahead, Kim, next slide. Okay. So Parallaxia, they are so cute. And they're one of my favorites. They really are a crested cutie. They got these great little crests, and a lot of people will see them and think that they are a cardinal, like a female cardinal, usually is what people think. And you could really understand why people would think that. They are closely related to northern cardinals. They're in the same family, but they have this crazy name, Pyrrhuloxias. I mean, it's such a strange name, but it is Greek. I don't know if you thought you were going to learn some Greek words today during this talk, but here we go. So the name is literally from two Greek words, pyros, meaning flame colored or red, which makes sense since they have these lovely sort of red flame colors coming up. And the other one is a little less obvious, and that's luxos. So pyros, luxos, so Pyrolexia. So that's where the name comes from. Not many species I can think of have like Greek names, but here we go. Pyrolexia is one of them. And the luxos, or the crooked concept, comes from the bill. And the bill of this bird actually turns out to be a really important feature for identifying them. But it's this little yellow bill they have that has a very curved culmen. So culmen is the area sort of like where the upper and lower mandible meet. So it's kind of like their mouth gap, where the two bill top and half meet is called the culmen. And because it's curved, and you kind of like a parrot-like effect. That is the idea of the crooked. So they had a crooked bill. So that's where the luxos comes in for the Pyrrhuloxia. So it's one of those names that's really hard for new birders to, you see that on the page and you're like, how the heck do I say this? But it is Pyrrhuloxia. And we did put a pronunciation phonetics guide on the recipe card just because it's such a tough one. Go ahead, Kim. So this first photo we're looking at right here is a male, and this one here is a female. So I do try to do that with identification ideas, because often, especially with these three species, the crested cuties, you very well may see a female on her own. So this photo is of a female. So some people refer to the Pyrrhuloxia as the desert cardinal. That is a name I've heard quite a lot. So it's kind of a colloquial term, and you certainly could use it too if you'd like, but it is how a lot of, I think, non-birders would describe this bird, because they are very much and quite often, not always, but often in the desert habitat. So the males, like that first photo, are gray toned with red on the face, chest, wings, and tail. So quite a lot of red, not like a northern cardinal male, but pretty bright red, especially in the spring and summer where they have red. It's very, very bright. So we have a question. Okay, and then the females, rather than sort of the silvery gray of the males that they primarily have, these are, the females are a warm brown with some red accents. They do have some red, but it's less than the males. So they have some in the crest, in the wings, and the tail, and a little bit on the face, but it's significantly less than what the males have. And they're also just noticeably more of a brown, warm brown color than the gray, the male. They, both genders will have yellow bills in the summer, but in the winter, the bills can be more grayish. So really keep that in mind. The bills can be, depending on the time of the year, either yellow or gray. And that's going to be quite an important differentiation from the northern cardinal. Northern cardinals have quite a different color bill. See if you can think about it. Try to imagine what the color bill is of a northern cardinal. We've all probably seen one, but we're going to see one later in the talk, but it is a different color. Go ahead, Kim, to the next slide.
Do you want the call at all?
Oh gosh, yes, I almost forgot about that. Yes, why don't you go ahead and play the Parallaxia, the song one first. It's coming through. It's kind of a sweet song, and it definitely sounds quite a lot like a cardinal, as you would expect when they're closely related to cardinals. But to me, the Parallaxia, it's usually a shorter song. The phrasing is quite a bit shorter. Go ahead and play the calls now. The other audio file. Yeah, that's sort of that phrase that we just heard. That's the one. I feel like Parallaxias do that a lot. They do it over and over again. All right, let's go ahead to the next slide, Kim.
Okay.
Okay, so distribution is such an important concept with identifying birds. If we have any new birders on this talk, which we really could, there's quite a few people here, just when you look through a field guide and you see that a lot of species look very similar, just take it. It's overwhelming when you see that, how many of these birds look so much like each other sometimes. Look at those range maps because they're often separated by space and time. So look at those range maps, and this is a range map for Pyrolexia. And you can see here, they're very much restricted to a very specific region of North America. They are in Southeast Arizona, through southern New Mexico, into West Texas, and then down into parts of Mexico. So they are permanent residents, meaning that they don't migrate. They specialize in sort of open desert scrub. So that's a term that you hear, that term, habitat term, a lot in areas sort of in the Tucson area. This sort of desert habitat with shrubs is kind of desert scrub in the U.S. Southwest region and northern Mexico. But they often breed in areas with lower vegetation density and habitat that is unsuitable for northern cardinals. So in the winter especially, you can see them mixing with northern cardinals in sort of mixed flocks at places where there's a lot of food. But in the breeding season, they tend to go in areas that are more dry than a northern cardinal could tolerate for breeding. And so that's where you get this desert cardinal concept. Go ahead, Kim, to the next slide. So this is a different range map. This is one of those very, very detailed range maps that you can see on eBird. The first one was more like what you'd see in a field guide book. But this is one of those very detailed ones based on people's community science observations. And it's quite detailed and more fine than just sort of a big blob of the purple that we were seeing before. Because you can see they're not through all northern Mexico. They're really focusing on that sort of scrub, lower elevation habitat. And there is also some really interesting evidence that the range of this bird has extended northward within the 20th century. So early explorers would come through and they would report, they would, find Pyrrhuloxias in Pima County, like so the Tucson area and then south. But over time, first records started showing up throughout the 20th century over time into Pinal County and then all the way up to Maricopa. So in terms of within the span of the 20th century, this bird seems to have really expanded north. And it's really very, very interesting concept. So before, the Pima County may have been the northern boundary, but in New Mexico and Texas, there's also been expansion of range reported as mesquite trees have spread through grassland areas. So as mesquites have encroached into some of these other habitats, Pyrrhuloxias have followed them. So they're really interesting birds that seem to be sort of spreading into a larger range. Go ahead to the next slide, Kim. So when it comes to nesting, which is going to be a really important concept for trying to make your yard a good place for these birds, they have some pretty specific needs. They need a pretty large territory, about a hectare. So that's pretty big, I would say, for a bird that size. And there's been a lot of research on this, and their territories tend to be roughly circular. Not always, but they usually are circular if the habitat allows it. And the size and shape of their territory is very similar to what a northern cardinal has been mapped to also utilize for a nesting territory. And they nest in dense brush. They like very, very dense, defendable type shrubs to nest in. And it's typically a mesquite or a gray thorn. If you've ever tried to walk through a patch of gray thorn, you know how formidable that plant can be. They're very, very long spines. But they've also been documented nesting in things like elderberry trees and Palo Verde trees. They do make a small, compact cup nest made of small twigs, and they put it away from the trunk. So they'll find a suitable, shrub or really, really dense, patch of tree that they think is going to be defendable or, hidden from predators. And then they don't put it right at the trunk. They put it away from the trunk. And my guess would be so that it makes it more difficult for predators to access the nest. So go ahead to the next slide. This concept of cover is going to be it's going to be said again and again because it's very important for all three of these crested cutie birds. So for urban habitat, there's been a lot of work done on Parallaxia, and it's very interesting sort of conclusions that densities, in this research was done in Tucson, densities in areas with non-native vegetation were extremely low. Pyrrhuloxias are very cued into native plants. They really, really need native plants. And in residential areas that had native vegetation, densities were about 25% of those in undisturbed native vegetation. So even when they come into urban zones that have native vegetation, it's still not as good as natural habitat. And this is going to be a difference with cardinals. Parallaxias are very sensitive to urban encroachment. So for breeding, the Southeast Arizona population, they nest in Sonoran uplands, and they will also utilize mesquite bosque and Sonoran riparian. So if you've been to places like the Sierra Vista area, they'll come into sort of the scrub areas, and so the urban areas, especially in the winter, and then we'll find them in the breeding season closer to the river, like in the mesquite bosques along the San Pedro River. So they really cue into the abundance of riparian zones and desert washes, those sorts of areas where there's going to be just more food, where the plants are going to have more berries and that there's going to just be more insect prey available. But in the wintering, during the wintering season, because they don't really leave the region, but they will move around through the habitat based on the time of year. So they often winter in riparian zones, again, but with sycamore ash, Arizona walnut, desert willow, or cottonwood. And they may be more abundant in, I can't read the bottom of that. What's the bottom line say, Kim?
Urban areas in winter.
Okay, thank you. I kind of touched on that earlier. So yes, they will come into feeders, especially in the winter. I have seen them at feeder stations all year, but they'll come into more densely urban areas in the winter time. They're just less sensitive to having large habitat patches for breeding and can tolerate more readily areas with native vegetation that are also urban. So go ahead to the next slide. Yeah, so food in the habitat is such an important concept for them. Cover is incredibly important. They need places to hide and to nest, but they're also, like all of us, very food focused, and they primarily eat seeds, large insects, and fruit. And of the insects, grasshoppers tend to be their favorite. I thought that was kind of interesting. I didn't know that about Parallaxia, so I was researching that. And they are very opportunistic feeders, and they will exploit a temporary and abundant food source, such as like sorghum from like an agriculture field. That's been especially reported in the Texas populations, that when there's a big crop coming in, that the Parallaxias will turn up and on the edges of the farm field feast on the sorghum that's left from a harvest. And I've seen this a lot too, where they will take advantage of like blooming saguaros. When the saguaros bloom in April, you see Parallaxias up on the saguaros drinking nectar, eating pollen, probably catching insects too. and they will also come to available water. So they have this really interesting flexibility, and Pyrrhuloxias especially have interested me as we look at like Tucson bird count data, because in a way they're pretty inflexible, where they really like native natural habitats. They really like native undisturbed desert scrub, or slightly disturbed. They don't do as well in urban settings as cardinals do. But on the other hand, they're also pretty flexible on what they eat, and especially in the winter, they can be more flexible than I sort of originally had an impression of with them. They're really interesting birds, and they're so cute. So I really like them. All right, go ahead to the next one, Kim. All right, Phainopepla. So this is our other crested cutie, the genetically the odd man out. This is actually a silky flycatcher. They look like a cardinal, and this is what a lot of people at our outreach locations will ask us. Oh, the black cardinal with the red eye, what bird is that? Or how do you say that bird? They're really cool. They are silky flycatchers, which is a family of birds that you find in Central and South America, and the only representative of that family in North America is the Phainopepla. So they're really cool, really interesting birds. Go ahead and play the calls, Kim, for this guy. So that little, so that's the common call I hear, especially throughout the winter.
Oh, not that one.
Okay. Yeah, I see a good question coming in about insect eaters surviving in the winter. It requires some flexibility, which we're going to talk about, and birds like Pyrrhuloxias and Phainopeplas and cardinals really show that flexibility, where they'll focus on insects during the breeding season. One, I'm sure, to maintain their own health, but also because that's primarily what the young need to feed on. But then if you can switch your food needs to fruits in the fall and winter, you're going to have a much better shot at being able to stay in a location. That's exactly what all three of these birds do, especially Phainopepla. So they're very closely tied to mistletoe in a way that gets talked about quite a lot. Mistletoe and Phainopeplas are like peas and carrots. They really go together. And mistletoe is their favorite. They will eat other fruits too, readily eat other fruits, but mistletoe is absolutely their favorite. And it's their primary food in a specific time of the year, and that's the fall and the winter. So when you're seeing Phainopeplas in the Tucson area or anywhere in the Southwest where they occur, they're going to be often associated with mistletoe. But this is really very much a thing in the fall, winter, and very early spring. Then things will shift. And they do defend a mistletoe patch from other birds, including other Phainopeplas. You'll see them up there sometimes chasing each other and fighting and trying to chase off a mockingbird or a robin or another Phainopepla, because the mistletoe is an important food source for them. But they will eat lots of other fruit too, including wolfberry, hackberry. And when they are at higher elevations, which we'll talk about, it's a fascinating situation with Phainopeplas and their elevational movements. They will eat other fruits such as elderberry and sumac. And they also fly catch for insects, where you'll see them, and I've seen them do this, it's hilarious. They'll be at the top of like a Palo Verde or a mesquite that has mistletoe. And you'll see them, they are silky flycatchers after all, so they'll fly up in this like absolute flutter of wings and tail, catch insects, and then come back down with them. They're pretty good at it. It's pretty funny to see. All right, go ahead. So this photo is a male. Go ahead to the next one, Kim.
Okay. Do you want me to play that other song really quick?
Oh, sure. Yeah, go ahead and play the other one.
Okay.
So this is a sound we should all start hearing. If you live in sort of the Sonoran Desert habitat of Tucson, that is a sound we should start hearing pretty soon. So I always think of it as the pretty bird song. They go, pretty bird. Ah. That's a main component of the song. And that is the actual song. The whoop is a call that both the males and females will do, but they will nest in the desert late winter, early spring. So they're starting to sing pretty soon. From now. So in the late winter, early spring, we'll start hearing that song throughout the desert. I just love that little pretty bird kind of call. It's a really pretty song. So this one here on the left now is a female. She looks a lot like the male, but she is the exact same size, shape, and posture and similar behavior. but instead of being a glossy black, she's a matte gray. So she's not as shiny as the male. She's more of sort of a slate gray. Really pretty, same red eye. It doesn't pop quite as much on her because she's not as black, but they both of the sexes do have a red eye, and they both have that same crest, same shape, posture, behavior of sitting on top of a clump of mistletoe. They both will do that. And they have flashes in the wings. This is a really important ID when you see them at a distance. Now, if you see a distant bird sitting up on top of a mesquite, especially if the mesquite has mistletoe in it or a Palo Verde or something, it's probably a Phainopepla. But when they fly, if you see this flash of white in the wings, which we're showing here on the right, it's a male, that's a really good marker for them. The females also have a flash, but it's gray, not white, so it doesn't pop quite as much, but it's a pretty good feature. You can see that at a distance when they're flying around. So that's a really good. Keep in mind, mockingbirds also have a white flash in the wing, but it doesn't pop quite as much because these male Phainopeplas are so black with a white flash, it really shows. All right, go ahead, Kim. So they have a very interesting story. Phainopeplas, who knew? These Phainopeplas that just hang out in urban Tucson, we see them so frequently, especially if you go into areas that are less densely urban. They have this fascinating life cycle that is still being researched, still being discovered. It's really, really interesting. So in the spring, they are desert nesters. So a population, like let's say the Tucson population of Phainopeplas will, in the spring, nest, if the conditions are right, will nest in the spring in the desert, in the Sonoran Desert. They'll often nest right in a clump of mistletoe. They're hanging out in Sonoran Desert. But then in the summer, it's now been verified. It's been long suspected, but now verified that in the summer, the same birds will move to a different elevation, to a higher elevation, to oak woodland, and nest again. This is incredibly rare behavior. It's called iterate migration. It's incredibly rare, and only a few species have been documented doing this among birds. It's very, very rare. And here we are having Phainopeplas right here where we live doing this behavior. So it's really, really cool. And it makes them highly flexible and adaptable to changing situations. And it's still being researched, but ones that they put tags on within the last few years were documented traveling up to 1,200 kilometers. This was a California population, moving up to 1,200 kilometers to do their second nesting cycle in a totally different habitat. That's what makes it rare, is that it's a second nesting after a migration to a different habitat. That's incredibly rare. But I suspect our birds, which were not the ones they put tags on, but I think ours move less. They don't have to go as far because we have this lovely situation. We have Sonoran Desert right near adjacent high elevation sky island habitat. So the birds that nest in Tucson in the spring could head up to, say, towards Madera Canyon or a little bit up, the Santa Catalinas, to then reach oak habitat to do their second nesting cycle. And they can also move around quite a lot in winter if the conditions require it. So for instance, that drought we had in the winter of 2020 into 2021, there was probably quite a lot of Phainopepla movement to avoid areas that didn't have enough food to get to those that did have food. So go ahead, Kim, to the next slide. So this is something you really want to keep an eye out for. And this is again a more detailed map showing where Phainopeplas occur. This is from eBird. They're really cool maps. I really suggest if you're interested in that, you check them out on eBird. But the fact that these birds can adapt to what they need is really very cool, and an incredibly rare adaptation that makes them pretty resilient when it comes to changes being thrown at them. But that being said, it's worth it for us all of us collectively, as well as any general public we can reach out to, all of us, to try to make urban habitat as good as we can for these birds, since breeding bird survey data has shown a population trend decreasing of about 3% every year. And so it's definitely one of those things where if anything we can do to help create stable habitat for them would be great. And that's within Arizona. The trends seem to be showing a decrease, a slight decrease, but still about 3% a year. Breeding bird survey data has its own problems. So I always take those with a grain of salt, but the same data set shows them to be increasing in California, interestingly. So that's interesting. But I think it's definitely a bird that we should keep in mind that doing urban habitat can be really very helpful for them. All right, go ahead, Kim, to the next slide. So the nests of Phainopeplas are really cool. I really like these. I've only found nests of these guys a few times in the wild because they hide them pretty darn well. They do their egg laying in February into March, so it's a very early, late winter, early spring kind of nesting, which makes sense. A lot of desert species will do that before it gets too hot. And this timing is past the peak fruit. The peak fruiting for mistletoe in the desert, or fruiting in the desert in general, happens in more in winter. So it's past that period, but that's where the adults were then feasting on that fruit to get through the winter. But this timing of February into March is really good insect availability in the desert. So that's a really important resource for them to feed the young. They really need to feed, nearly all birds need to feed their young a lot of insects. They need that protein to grow as quickly and as healthy as possible. So they often nest on a horizontal branch fork. And that's where I've usually found them, is in like a really dense Palo Verde or something, where there'll be like a fork and a branch, and they'll nest kind of right in the fork, like this photo is showing, with a male coming into a begging juvenile, or sometimes right inside of a mistletoe clump. Part of it is it keeps maybe a little, gives them some nice shade, but also mistletoe is pretty thick, and it's what really helps defend them from predators. All right, go ahead to the next slide, Kim. So yeah, so I guess here's another photo showing just a bigger, fatter baby on its nest. And so go ahead to the next one, Kim. So fruit is key for them. These guys, fruit is a huge resource for them, and I wanted to show some photos of Phainopeplas away from mistletoe, although that seems to be absolutely their favorite in the lowlands, but they love other fruits too. So this photo on the left is a female Phainopepla going after a graythorn berry. Graythorn is a really nice berry producer, makes these beautiful, like she's holding their beautiful big purple berries. And then a desert hackberry on the right, a male, very happily nestled in among a larder of berries. All right, go ahead to the next one, Kim. So they also have this really interesting social behavior that varies by season and habitat. So not only does their location change, so they also change their behavior according to what's going on. So they are quite solitary in the winter. So we see them here in the desert areas of like the Sonora Desert, where they're hanging out in usually mistletoe clumps. They're quite solitary, or I'll see them maybe in pairs, but they're usually pretty darn solitary, and they each sort of defend their own little patch of mistletoe. And it's kind of funny, you can see them in an area where trees have a lot of mistletoe, you see them kind of spread out evenly. But then in late winter, early spring, they will defend a breeding territory, really defend it quite fiercely. But then in late spring, they leave the desert in these loose flocks, and they kind of will travel together, it seems to be, to their next destination of the higher elevation of woodland usually. And they will nest in a loosely colonial way, which is different than what they did in the desert. They kind of stick together a bit more up in the woodlands, and they'll sometimes even forage together during the nesting, during their summer nesting season. So they have these changes in behavior too that are just so interesting. There is more to be unraveled about the Phainopepla story. And I think I was really surprised when this research came out in 2019, where they put trackers on Phainopeplas and it was verified that they were iterate migrants. It got a little bit of press attention, but that was a huge discovery. I feel like it should have gotten more attention in the birding community, but the research continues. And I think as the final riddles are unraveled about these birds, it's going to be a big splash. It's a very interesting story that it still has, I think, a final chapter. All right, go ahead, Kim, to the next slide. So Northern Cardinal, and go ahead and play that song when you get a chance, Kim. So Northern Cardinals are an absolute favorite of many people. They're such cool birds. And the only phrase that came to mind for me was just absolute legends. These guys are absolute legends. They're one of the most abundant birds of North America. They're iconic yard birds. And I feel like of all the birds I see on commemorative plates, cardinals are right up there. The birds I see mostly on Christmas cards are Northern Cardinals. And they are actually the state bird for 7 different states. When I saw that fun fact, I was like, wow, that's something I gotta share. That's pretty cool. Not this state, but 7 other states with the state bird. Do you have the audio, Kim?
Yeah.
Okay, let's go ahead and play that now.
You hear it?
Yeah. So it sounds really similar to Parallaxia for sure. And sometimes I try to test myself in the field. I'll hear one singing and I'll try to like, okay, I think it's this one. I think it's either Parallaxia or Northern Cardinal. And then I'll chase it down, and I'm sometimes wrong because they can be sound-alikes quite a lot. But it's a bit tricky, but they tend, having listened to a lot of them and a lot of Parallaxias in the field, generally now, so just a general rule of thumb, generally they sing with more different phrases. Parallaxias tend to repeat a phrase quite a lot, whatever phrase is their favorite, I guess. We'll repeat it quite a lot. But the Cardinals tend to, I think, have a little bit more variability in their song. So it's tricky, but sometimes you have to chase them down and find them. But what really blew me away was where the name comes from. Because we talked so much about where Pyrrhuloxia's name comes from. Where the Cardinal name comes from is crazy. So it's from the Latin. So we did Greek before, now we're into Latin. So from the Latin, the word cardin means hinge. So the name doesn't have anything to do with saying like necessarily a color, but cardin means hinge. And this came from the Catholic Church, where the positions, the priests that became known as the cardinals, because they were like a hinge of the church, a very important player in the church. And so this word cardin, meaning hinge, later came to mean just something very important. So like the cardinal directions, northeast, southwest, is another concept from the same idea, that cardinal just meaning very, very important. And so these very important priests in the Catholic Church wore robes of scarlet red. So the bird is named for this church position, the fact that they have a similar color of robes. The word does not originally have anything to do with the color red. It's such an interesting story. So it's actually named for the priests in the Catholic Church that are cardinals that have the red robe. So it's really interesting, really, really cool. So go ahead to the next slide. So that was a male first, and here's a female. So you can see from the bill here that this is a very different color than what we were seeing in those Pyrrhuloxias. So to identify a Northern Cardinal, the male is bright red, iconically bright red with a black face mask. The females are a warm tan, which looks similar to Parallaxia, because the females of Parallaxia usually are a warm tan as well, warm brown tan. And so warm tan with little bits of gray, like on the neck and stuff, and they have red in the wings, tail, and crest, similar to female Parallaxia. Both male and female have a crest, but they have a conical coral colored bill. So this pinkish coral colored bill that's bigger than a Parallaxia. It's longer, it's straighter, sort of a straighter culmen, and it's not yellow or gray like a Parallaxia. So this is a really important ID feature, especially for newer birders. And another really interesting thing about Northern Cardinals is that the females are known to sing. They only sing about, estimated wise, they only sing about 10% as often as the males, but they do sing, and they sing complete complex song too. So really interesting concept of female song among birds was discovered in Northern Cardinals. Now it looks like it's happening in a lot more species than they thought, but it's quite apparent in Cardinals since the females look different from the males. So let's go ahead to the next slide. So range is a really interesting story with Northern Cardinals, right? So there's some geographic variation for sure. There's a lot of different subspecies. There are 18 identified subspecies. I think a lot of this has to do with cardinals being so abundant in the East and so popular that a lot of research has been done on these birds. So they've been divided into 18 different subspecies. And the ones we have here in arid areas have larger bills. That's a feature that all the ones in more arid regions of Northern Cardinal have larger bills than those in wetter regions. And the thought is that maybe it helps them disperse heat. That was the main theory I came across. But our subspecies is Cardinalis superbus. They're superbus, and they are the largest of all the subspecies. I thought that was really cool. And Northern Cardinals tend to be year-round residents throughout their entire range. There is almost no evidence of them migrating at all. Now, they do habitat move. So they'll change their habitat within an area from the year, from different times of the year to take advantage of different food sources, but they don't really migrate in the sense that we think of like bluebirds migrating or other birds migrating. They don't really do that. They tend to stay put. And our population of Northern Cardinals has a very similar situation to some of our other birds that we think of as being Eastern birds, where it's a population that we're sharing with Madre in Mexico. So go ahead to the next slide, Kim. So our sky islands, our mountains here, and you can really see it much easier on this map. So this is an eBird map, again, that's a little more detailed based on actual observations. So you can see they're dense in the east. The vast majority of their range is in the east and the eastern half of the United States, and they are very dense in those areas. There is an introduced population in Los Angeles. I thought that was interesting, but they're quite rare in California. So for the West, their main holdout is Southern Arizona. So there's a little bit into New Mexico and into West Texas, but this sort of Sonoran Desert habitat of Southern Arizona down into Madre in Mexico. So from Arizona here, and you can see this purple patch coming down, that's a pretty good outline of the Sierra Madre region of West Mexico, which so many of our species, our iconic birds here, come up from that area. So like elegant trogons, a lot of it. So it's a very similar story of an eastern bird that's established, what we think of as an eastern bird, that's established in Madrean, West Mexico, that has a range extension into Southern Arizona. So it's really interesting. And there's historic records to suggest an expansion in Arizona in the last century, that they may have been expanding north within Arizona towards Camp Verde. So within the last century, there was, went from a period of no records of northern cardinals in the Camp Verde area to now they're relatively common. So they seem to be moving a bit north, which is really kind of cool. All right, go ahead to the next slide, Kim. So habitat preference for these guys, and I'm speaking of the cardinals we would find in Arizona, okay? So they tend to focus on riparian edge with mesquite and gray thorn, desert scrub, mesquite, acacias, and mimosas. So those are those little shrubs you see that are like cat claw acacia looking with the pink fuzzy flowers in the spring, and then especially in the monsoonal summer. So for nesting, they need woody plants with dense foliage, and they select nest sites that are denser vegetation than random points within the same habitat patch. So that's a very common language you hear with wildlife biology. So within a patch, they're going basically for the densest cover. That's what that really means. And it's not random. They're doing it purposefully. All right, so go ahead to the next slide, Kim. So yeah, they have, in Arizona, they tend to nest in riparian habitats. Arizona sycamore is a common tree that they'll sometimes nest in, netleaf hackberry, and the juveniles look absolutely hilarious. Once these birds fledge, and this photo on the right is a juvenile. So the photo on the left is an adult feeding a young bird, but this one on the right is a younger juvenile. And every spring, I'll get calls at Tucson Audubon about cardinals with black beaks. And they look so funny. They look so gangly, these fledglings with these black bills and these bright black eyes that really seem to really pop in their heads. And they look so confused and just introduced to the world. And I just think they're so funny. I always love seeing juvenile, like sort of young juvenile, just fledged cardinals, because they just have this hilarious look about them. So if you see a cardinal with a black bill, you're looking at quite a young bird that has left the nest very recently. So enjoy it, because they're very comical. They're really funny. All right, go ahead to the next slide, Kim. So foraging in wilds and yards is such a thing. So cardinals are opportunistic feeders. The seeds and fruits as well as insects are their favorites, and they are experts at crushing seeds. So those bills are very good. And if you've ever seen them at a feeder in your yard, you can watch them manipulate like a sunflower seed in their bill with their tongue and then crush it at just the right spot to get the lovely food out. But they do feed their nestlings nearly all insects. So that's like many birds, they really focus on those insects for the young birds. So they need an area that has both seeds and fruits for them, but also they need a lot of insect prey for their young. But when they do come to feeders, they do prefer sunflower seeds, and especially black oil sunflower seeds. So that's a common question we get a lot. How do I get cardinals in my yard? People really want cardinals in their yard. If you're doing a feeder, mixes aren't usually their favorites if they really focus in on those sunflower seeds and black oil especially. All right, go ahead to the next one. And they also use natural foods too, like the saguaro. I'm showing saguaro fruits and ocotillo blossoms. So in the desert, you'll see them taking advantage of food opportunities. All right, next slide, Kim. Thank you. So for them, another really important feature of cardinals, as well as Pyrrhuloxias, is they really need water. Water is really important to them. It's a lovely series of photos from Doris Evans showing a cardinal bathing. Water is a very important habitat feature. One of the best ways to attract many of our birds to your yard is to have both cover with dense shrubs and cover, as well as providing water, clean water. And the northern cardinals may not occur in an area that is otherwise suitable if there's no drinking water or food with high water content. So more in the wildlands, like out in the desert, if they have food available to them that has a lot of water in it, like flower blossoms or berries, they can maybe make a go of it. But they really do need access to water or food that's quite rich in water. All right. So that's my last slide. Take it away, Cam.
Cool. Thanks, Jenny. So I was going to talk briefly about how to attract these crested cuties into your own yards. So here's our little recipe for success. So the ingredients are shelter. Like Jenny said, dense cover and mistletoe is really important. They need habitat, so tall trees that produce seeds and berries. Food, so berries, or like Jenny said, the black oil sunflower seeds, especially for the cardinals. And then we need to also provide safety. So that is window strikes, like urban safety, I would say. So window strikes and cats especially. So taking the ingredients and into the directions, the first thing we want to do is keep cats indoors. We'll talk a little bit about the detrimental effects of cats. The next step is to grow dense shrubs. Next is to keep the mistletoe, provide water, and then also prevent window strikes. So number one, keep cats indoors. So the background photo of this slide is an award-winning photo by Jack Wonderly. It's titled Caught by Cats. So this represents the pretty devastating impact that cats have on wildlife. So all of these animals, so there's birds on the middle, and then it expands out to include mammals, rodents, reptiles, lizards. So all of these birds were brought to a single rehab facility in California in 1 year. And so, and each of them suffered injuries from cats. And this was in the year 2019. So this is just 1 year in one facility. So in the United States alone, 2.4 billion birds are killed by cats every year, along with 12 billion mammals. So data from Audubon, New York indicates that almost 75% of non-natural bird deaths are caused by cats. Window strikes come in second, collisions, so this includes collisions with vehicles, electrical lines, and wind turbines comes in third, and then oil pits come in last. But you can just see how much of an impact cats have on bird mortality. So the second step is to grow dense shrubs. Thickly branched shrubs like hackberry, gray thorn, wolfberry offer crested cuties, cover, shelter, and nesting opportunities, and great protection from elements and predators. So I'm just going to highlight a few species that are really great for crested cuties. So the first one is wolfberry. This is Berlandier's wolfberry here. There's a few different wolfberry species here that do well in Southern Arizona. But it's a thorny woody shrub with intricate branching, and it gets about 3 to 10 feet tall. The fall blooms are a great nectar source for butterflies, including the funeral dusky wing and queen and monarch butterflies. So there's small little purple to lavender to almost white flowers that bloom from January to April, depending on rainfall. The fruit is really good. I've been seeing it a lot when I go hiking. I just kind of eat it. They taste like a salty tomato, but they're pretty delicious, and the birds love them. And if you do want to plant this in your yard, just make sure it's in the full sun. Too much shade kind of produces a lengthy, kind of gnarly looking wolfberry, and it doesn't flower as much. So the next is the velvet mesquite. We always try to advocate for the native mesquites just because they provide so much better habitat and safety than non-native like Chilean mesquites. So this is a big tree, about 25 to 40 feet. The flowers are yellow to green, and they form like a spike-like structure. And they'll bloom late spring to the summer. And then they produce those infamous fruits pods. But yeah, velvet mesquite is just a haven for tons of insects, which in turn attract a lot of great birds like Verde and Lucy's warblers, and of course the crested cuties. Next is hackberries. This one is the desert hackberry, so Celtis pallida. The structure is a large shrub or small tree up to 12 feet. The flowers are very small and green and just really inconspicuous. Can't really see them. However, their fruits are beautifully bright orange to red, kind of like the color of this cardinal. And they do have a large pit, kind of like a cherry in them, but they are good. Just be careful when you eat them to be wary of that pit. Next is the blue Palo Verde. So the blue Palo Verde is actually Arizona's state tree. It can grow up to 30 feet tall and 25 feet wide for its canopy. It has bright green or blue to green bark and seasonally tiny leaves. When it flowers, it has profuse clusters of bright yellow 5-petaled flowers, and they bloom from March or April, depending on the elevation and rainfall. If there is a lot of rainfall, the flowers can bloom throughout the summer months. Palo Verde is a great source of food and shelter for wildlife. So hummingbirds, mourning doves, and white-winged doves find them an ideal tree for nesting, as well as quail will also roost at night under them, and the rabbits will munch on the fallen litter. So the next step is to create brush piles. So brush piles offer shelter, nesting, and foraging opportunities for our crested cuties, as well as a wide variety of wildlife, especially insects. So they make a great addition to your habitat at home if you have the space to do so. So many birds require this dense, brushy sites to nest in. So brush piles just provide an extra opportunity for them to forage and nest and raise their babies. So these are a couple examples of brush piles that Jennie has taken. So the bottom one is actually at our patent center down in Patagonia. And the other one is in Rio Rico at Richard's house. So just a couple different opportunities to show you how you can incorporate brush piles into your yard. So you just want to make sure that you make the brush pile work for your space, as well as for wildlife. So make sure that you construct it in the right place with the right features. So if you consider to surround your brush pile with native plants, that also increases the food and habitat as well. And do place them at the edge of your yard and make sure that you have a yard big enough to have one. You don't want them too close to your yard because they do attract, some snakes and rodents and stuff like that. But just make sure they're a little bit further away from your home. And incorporating also like a rock pile for lizards, and a bird bath will also attract more wildlife and give butterflies and bees a place to bask and get some sun. All right. So the fourth step is to keep the mistletoe. So mistletoe is for the birds. Mistletoe offers a stable and long-lasting source of fruit for many birds and mammals. In dry times, it can be the only fruit that's available in the desert, so it helps bridge that gap between seasons. And it provides food for many species, not just birds. So I'll kind of just go through this since Jennie covered it so well. Mistletoe and Phainopepla, it's just a great mutualistic relationship. Mistletoe, of course, is the main food source for Phainopepla during the winter, which in turn makes it the best distributor of seeds for the mistletoe. So it's a great relationship there. So that. And so desert mistletoe feeds not only the Phainopepla, but it feeds a host of caterpillars, native bees, butterflies, and mammals, as well as other birds. So flycatchers and bluebirds really rely on mistletoe berries as well. So pollinators especially need mistletoe because mistletoe flowers so early in the season, and not a lot of other flowers are. So it provides that necessary pollen for early emerging native bees and emerging butterflies as well. And of course, you get your little squirrels, chipmunks eating the berries as well. Not the berries, excuse me, the foliage, as well as deer and cattle. Next step is to provide water. So water is a great way to easily attract birds to your yard. And it doesn't have to be anything fancy. It could be a simple dish of water that you just fill up whenever you're watering your plants. Just keep it clean. But if you add some sort of water circulation, you get that noise of water, which is just a great way to attract birds, and to just hear that sound so well, and they're just instinctively attracted to it. So you can even do like a water dish with one of those little solar pumps in it. That's a great way to easily provide some great water resources for birds. And then if you have this space, in-ground ponds are fantastic. It's a great feature to your yard as well as habitat components. There's a lot of different options to providing water that can be just a statement piece in your yard or just something small, but they all just provide such great resources, especially during the summer months. Next step is to prevent window strikes, and our expert on this, Olya, is going to go over these slides.
Thanks, Kim.
Yeah.
Crested cuties here are vulnerable to window strikes as they interact in the habitat, diving in and out of bushes, feeding, foraging, and displaying territorial behavior. Cardinals are especially known for fighting their own reflections during the breeding seasons, when the hormones are flowing and reflections look like another individual trespassing on your territory. But with any and all species of birds, if you're inviting them to your yard, it is critical to reduce the hazards presented by the proximity to buildings. Next slide. Windows are dangerous to birds due to transparency. So if a bird is seeing something that they want to get to on the other side of the glass, and of course, reflectivity. So if there's a mirror effect on the sky, which oftentimes that is during a specific time of day, or if it has a specific coating on the window that creates that mirror effect, it reflects that sky or habitat that the bird may want to get to. Next slide. Every year, 365 million to 1 billion birds die from window strikes in the US alone. And that's 1 million birds a day on the lower side of the estimate. And that's every year, year after year, and only counting United States. So that's a lot of birds that perish due to this awful hazard. Next slide. The number one best thing you can do to prevent window strikes is by making your windows visible to birds. You can do so by creating designs directly on the window or in front of the window. There are some options that we'll quickly go over, but they all have to follow the same rules. All designs must be visible from at least 10 feet away and must be on the outside of the window surface. If you're going with stripes, they must be at least 1/8 of an inch wide and dots at least 1/4 of an inch in diameter. With that said, bigger patterns are seen better from greater distances, of course. No matter the pattern, the designs must be spaced 2 inches apart to protect even our smallest species like our hummingbirds and goldfinches. If you're seeing a territorial interaction with a reflection, go ahead and cover that part completely with a potted plant or by drawing with a bar of soap on the outside. Usually after about a week, they move on and don't come back. But if that does happen again, you can cover it for a longer period of time. Next slide. Some of the most popular methods that have been tested by American Bird Conservancy are listed here. Okopian Bird Savers uses hanging cords, strings or ribbon of at least 1/8 of an inch wide. This is a great option that doesn't adhere directly to the window. They also call them the Zen curtains as they sway in the wind. Oftentimes you can make your own by following a tutorial online, or you can order them pre-made on the link on our website. Tempera paint or chalk paint is another great option. You can get creative with this and you make lines, you can make special designs. I used a stencil here on this example picture. It doesn't have to be fancy. You can involve family, friends, kids, and switch up designs seasonally if you want. These do remove easily with window cleaner, but stay up under regular rain conditions. Feather friendly is another great one. It makes it easy. They make it easy by providing tape that you unroll onto the surface, and it leaves this dotted pattern. They're decals and they last for years and years. We sell them at our nature shop as well. Kaleidoscape is a company that makes special window film. You can have plain colors or images printed. Kaleidoscape is the type of window film that they use on advertising on buses, for example. So you can see out, but you can't see in, and it helps kind of cut down on the cost for cooling your house, for example. There's a lot of different advantages to each one of those methods. Next slide. Finally, we have, we also offer a very affordable option, because what's more affordable than free? We have these window decal kits offered at the counter of our nature shop. So please come by and get a free kit and check out other things that we sell for this specific issue at our nature shop. Next slide. All the resources that I covered here very quickly are available, described in more detail on our website, tucsonaudubon.org/window-strikes. It has great video describing prices, installation, and how each method looks like from the inside as well as outside. So check that out. You can also see all those methods displayed at our Mason Center. So if you're birding in the area, come check it out. Next slide. And of course, included on our website is a registration link for our free recognition program, Bird Safe Buildings. To register, you simply have to fill out a short survey. Tell us how you prevent window strikes at home, and you will receive a letter of appreciation and a free recognition decal. This helps us learn more about what you do and how many people in our area take action in their homes. So let's save those crested cuties and more. And back to you, Kim.
Thank you. All right, so that's pretty much the end. So if you do all these steps of keeping cats indoors, growing dense shrubs, keeping your mistletoe, providing water, preventing window strikes, you can have a successful habitat for crested cuties. I want to take a second here to talk about the Habitat at Home program. So if you'd like to create more successes and attract even more birds and pollinators and other beneficial wildlife, we encourage you to join the Habitat at Home program, whose mission is to create an enhanced bird, pollinator, and wildlife habitat in urban landscapes through education, individual and community participation, recognition, and restoration. So one thing that I do want to say is that Habitat at Home is for all yards and at all, they'd say, levels. So if your house looks like the photo on the bottom, joining Habitat at Home before getting started is perfect. That way you can plan out how you exactly want to landscape your yard to make it bird and wildlife friendly, and you just have a nice blank area to work with. But if you already have a great habitat like this top photo, we would love it if you join the program as well, just to help support the program and advocate for the birds and bees and butterflies and share what we're doing with your neighbors. And it doesn't have to be, you don't have to have a huge yard to join. An apartment balcony can provide a great little patch of habitat, just with a few native plants and some water. So we encourage everyone to join, all levels, experiences. Anyone can join. We have something for every yard. And we also have new missions that we're trying to accomplish. So not only are we just providing habitat for birds, we're expanding into native pollinators. So monarchs, caterpillars, native bees, moths, bats, lizards. We also have a few initiatives that we're promoting here for dark skies, pesticide free, as well as the Nest Box program. And we also have an awesome restoration crew that does fantastic work that are available to Habitat at Home members. They can come to your house, assess it, tell you what needs to be done, what needs to be taken out if you have invasive species. They can write up a plan for you. There's a whole list of services that the restoration crew offers that are just fantastic, and they can even install it for you like they've done in this home here. For more information, you can go to TucsonAudubon.org/habitat. There's a one-time fee of $35 for Tucson Audubon members, but that gets you your Habitat at Home yard sign and your manual, which guides you through the steps of creating habitat in your backyard, as well as some other great reference materials. And of course, it helps provide funding for the program. And then we also have we'll be doing presentations for all 5 of the new recipe cards that are shown here. The 2 that are scheduled in the upcoming months, February 3rd, Olya will be doing the recipe card for Lucy's warblers. And then March 14th, we'll be doing the pollinator recipe card. So that's going to include native bees, butterflies. That's the main focus of this card. But then we'll also be doing later on greater roadrunners and creatures of the night, which features elf owls, bats, and nighthawks. And that's it for us. I don't know if we left any time for questions, but
Yeah. Sorry, we went over time.
You.
It's my fault, as usual.
Yeah, I
No, it's
think maybe maybe we're a little over time. I want to be respectful of everyone's time here today. So we'll end it here, but I encourage you all in the audience to reach out if you have any specific questions to our 3 wonderful presenters. They're here to help you on your journey to making your own yard more friendly for wildlife. So don't hesitate to reach out. And thank you so much for joining us today. Thank you, Kim, Olya, and Jennie for these fabulous presentations. I know I learned a lot, and I hope you all did too. And we're gonna have this recording up on YouTube as soon as possible so that you can revisit it as many times as you want. And I think that's all for us today. Thanks again for joining us, and we hope that we'll see you again soon at another event or field trip, and take care.
thanks, everyone.